Another week of all things people, power, and politics almost in the books, and there's a lot to talk about tonight. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. It is so hard to keep up with everything going on in our state and around the world, but that's why we're here to help you sift through all of that. So toss that phone aside and let's go. One of the lawmakers on the list of a man accused of shooting 2 Minnesota lawmakers and their spouses is in Studio C tonight. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell with what we need to do to lower that temperature. And like we said at the top, there is so much to unpack in this news cycle. Oakland University political science professor Dave Dulio is answering your questions. That's in about 20 minutes. But we begin once again with the tensions between Israel and Iran. Right now, Israel is trying to decide how to take out the Fordow nuclear facility, which is buried hundreds of feet underground. One of the options involves sending elite Israeli Air Force commandos to take it out. They've done it before, taking out an Iranian missile factory in Syria, entering the facility, planting explosives, and blasting that complex. A retired Israeli major general says taking out Fordow is critical to ending this conflict.
Anybody who wants the war to be over soon, to be finished quickly, have to find a way to deal with Fordow. Those who think that attacking Fordow will escalate the war, in my judgment, it can de-escalate and terminate the war.
President Trump said this week he'll decide if the U.S. will directly strike Iran within the next 2 weeks. Back here in Detroit, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was in the Motor City. A lot of focus has been on the southern border, but Noem says more focus needs to be done on the northern border, the one we share with Canada as well. She accuses Canada of being weak on border security, allowing drug traffickers and organized crime rings into our country.
Strengthening not just what we do at our ports of entry to scan shipping containers, trucks, cars, passengers, people and pedestrians that may cross, but also what we're doing out on the waters and on your Great Lakes and what we're doing to make sure that we're stopping and doing interdictions going forward. We have broken the record for the lowest illegal alien encounters at the southern border for 2 months in a row in the history of the nation.
Noem says while encounters at the northern border are down, Canada simply needs to do more. She wants to see stronger surveillance and better sensors at those points. We reached out to the Canada Border Services industry, who says the plan is their largest investment into the border in the nation's history. And they partner with the United States to strengthen security at those entry points. You know, a hallmark of President Trump's immigration crackdown is ICE raids in communities across the country. We've heard so much about that in the last few weeks. Federal agents taking people here illegally into custody. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, announcing this week it'll keep operating going at the places like farms, restaurants, and hotels. But tonight, we're getting a closer look at the fears these raids are driving. Take California, for example. A Stanford University study shows absences at several California schools were up more than 20% the first 2 months of this year compared to last year. You'll remember DHS lifted restrictions on arrests in places like churches and schools. Officials say they're doing what Americans want, but employers say they're noticing these absences too.
American people want these public safety threats removed. You know, we've found so many known suspected terrorists, human traffickers, fentanyl dealers. That is what the American people want, and that's what ICE dedicated to do right now, is to make sure that we are taking the worst of the worst out of the neighborhoods.
We're a little behind in workers. People are scared about the current immigration situation. These don't want to leave their homes. They fear, well, what's going to happen to my family if I get caught?
I went to Mariachi Plaza, it's an iconic location in the Mexican-American part of Los Angeles. It was a ghost town. It was Father's Day. There were restaurants. I went to 4 restaurants. 3 of them had no customers in it. It looked like COVID. It looked like that time period when everything was shut down.
All of this as the federal appeals court rules California National Guard troops can stay under President Trump's control. You may remember he deployed them in response to protests earlier this month. You know, we say it all the time. This news cycle is like drinking through a fire hose, constant alerts on your phone. So let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories we're following at this hour. President Trump wants to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate his 2020 election loss. Trump repeated his baseless claims of widespread election fraud in a social media post and called President Biden, quote, grossly incompetent. Courts across the country, as well as then Attorney General William Barr, all said there's no evidence of fraud that would have overturned his 2020 loss. Were there irregularities? There always are. But was there enough to overturn an election? No, even according to many Republican independent counsels. The Department of Homeland Security called the election the most secure one in American history. A federal judge blocking the Trump administration from withholding transportation money from states that don't agree to take part in some immigration enforcement. The judge called the conditions slapped on the money unlawful and unconstitutional. 20 states, including Michigan, sued after they said Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy threatened to cut off funds. Duffy said he'll fight this ruling. The ruling is in place while the lawsuit plays out. And staying in court, where another federal judge blocks the Trump administration's efforts to keep Harvard from hosting international students. The judge said Harvard can host foreign students while this case plays out. The Department of Homeland Security withdrew the school's certification in May. Harvard sued, calling it illegal retaliation for not following White House demands regarding campus protests, admissions, and hiring. Let's turn now to the tragedy in Minnesota after the break. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, her name was on the list of targets by the accused gunman. She's in Studio C with us right now saying we need to turn down the temperature, and she means Democrats and Republicans. What does she mean, and how do we do it? You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to talk about political violence and how we need to turn the temperature down. Someone who knows a thing or two about this, having been in public life for so many years of her life. And now, just recently, the last threat that we saw in Minnesota, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell's name on that list, rather, of that monster who has now been caught. But so many people afraid because of that. First of all, how did you find out that your name was on that list? And what happened right away when that happened?
So, all weekend, I'm very concerned. I had met and knew the Speaker of the House in Minnesota who was killed. So it was somebody that we knew, and it rattled many of my friends in Minnesota. Were very close and rattled. I had, quite frankly, completed a briefing by I think our state police tried very much to brief everybody at the same time. There had been a bipartisan meeting of the state legislators, all of the state legislators in the delegation. And at that time, they didn't know we were on the list, and it said nobody from Michigan was on the list. And about an hour later, I got a call from the threat assessment saying the FBI was saying we were on a list in the car. I still don't have a lot of all the answers to questions that I want, but I want to say this. The law enforcement in this state were incredible to all of us. They made sure we were safe while he was at large and worked with me to make sure we went ahead with our town hall meetings and made sure that people there knew that they would be safe. And I think it's very important when something like this happens that we work as a community to make sure everybody's safe, but terrorists want to terrorize us, and if you're foreign or domestic, we can't let that happen.
You talk about political temperature, and it's now become a buzzword to say we have to turn the political temperature down. I want to ask someone who's been in the middle of politics for the bulk of her life, how do you do it? Where do you start? And should it take a tragedy? And that's the sad part. 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, this shooting, it shouldn't have to take that to bring people to their senses.
I frequently say social media is one of the biggest issues that we've had because we are normalizing violence. We are normalizing the way that people are bullied online, the things that people say. It's anonymous, and they think that they can say anything. And I do think we all have a responsibility. And look, this isn't one side or another. You can disagree agreeably. You can disagree respectfully. And we have to do that. We are normalizing violence. And quite frankly, after 9/11, we came together to protect our community, to make sure there wasn't a backlash. After the hurricanes, we've come together. We have not come together like I would like to see us have come together after Minnesota. Now, many of my Republican friends are worried and have said that, but all of us need to condemn it, and all of us have to work to dial the temperature down.
Well, and I think that's so important because when you talk about what has happened in our country, you look at your colleague, Steve Scalise, who's a friend of yours, friend of mine. I've known him for many years. This was years before President Donald Trump, as a candidate, took a bullet to the ear. This was before this Minnesota occasion. This has been happening for a long time. And social media has been around for a long time, and they say how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if I handle things in conflict a certain way online, I'm going to handle it that way outside. Do you believe that to be true?
I think social media is greatly contributing to it. I mean, it was horrific what happened to Steve on that softball field, and people did come together after that time. But we're seeing repeatedly events that are happening against Republicans and Democrats. I mean, the most recent, Governor Shapiro's house being firebombed, even the kidnap threat. And one of those kidnappers said some terrible things about me, too. You know, I've been protested since I've been a member of Congress. When the kids on Green New Deal, because I didn't sign on at first, I worked and brought people together. I said to them, I'm going to bring everybody to the table. You didn't have everybody at the table. I give any. In those days, the kids were nice. I talked to them. They talked to me. I wasn't afraid of them. And people need to be able to voice their opinions. They need to be able to express. Freedom of speech is something we must protect. But we got to stop this normalization.
I've seen so many websites and so many Facebook pages during the election that actually were, again, by Democrats saying that if we don't stop, someone needs to stop President Trump. Someone needs to stop Trump. Stop Trump. He's a threat to our society and our democracy. And then he was shot at last July. This is on both sides. And I want to make that very clear, that there are extreme left Antifa folks, there are extreme right folks who are doing the same thing. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is it's wrong. And that's what you're here to say.
I've said that, and I keep saying I was so grateful nothing happened to President Trump, because I'm afraid of what would have happened in this country if it had. I mean, we have to stand up to violence. All of us. We've got a responsibility to do it. And what I really fear, what I've watched this week, is we're just normalizing it. It's okay. It's not okay. It's simply not okay. And all of us have to say it's not okay. And I don't have a simple answer, because I've always worked across the aisle. I can be very pointed when I don't agree, but I do it respectfully. And I think we all need to be scared about what we're watching. And
what we're watching, so much of it is on social media. We had Steve Scalise on the show just a few weeks back, and he said no one covers the big stories where bipartisan legislation is literally signed and onto the desk. He was proudly telling us, Steve Scalise was proudly telling us about a bill that he signed with a Democrat that reached President Biden's desk at the time, and he was proud of that. We can all do something. We have a minute left here. I want to talk to you about the situation overseas, because it affects so many of us here at home. Where do you see this conflict going in this 2-week wait that President Trump is talking about before deciding whether America gets involved with Iran and Israel? Where do you see all this going? I'm very worried. I'm going to tell you that I'm one of the people that does believe, as Mike Rogers said today in WJR, the president needs to talk to the Congress. We have been noticed today that we'll have a War Powers Act that he needs to talk to us. We cannot let Iran get nuclear weapons. I also don't want to see another war in the Mideast. It's just a very, very complicated time. What is it that you see happening next? Do you see perhaps some diplomacy? Right now we have European leaders meeting with Iranian leaders. Desperate for diplomacy to work. I think we need to use every means possible through diplomacy to try to de-escalate this, make sure they don't have the nuclear capability, and to protect peace in the Middle East, which we do not have right now. So it's a very dangerous situation. Well, from President Trump to Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, so many people on both sides of the political aisle have condemned this violence. It's your job at home to do the same on social media. Don't feed into the hate. Congresswoman, good to see you as always. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse. Be safe and be well. No shortage of news coming from the White House. We're hanging out with Oakland University political science professor Dave Dulio after the break with his take on so many big headlines. And are the guardrails dead? He takes on that question next on The Pulse. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This is The Pulse. As you know, there's never a shortage of political news, and one guy who can help sift through it all is Oakland University political science professor Dave Dulio. And the cool thing is, we always say this show is about you. We truly mean that. We actually have some of you asking questions to Dave, and we'll get to those in just a moment. But let's begin by saying thank you to Dave for being here on The Pulse tonight. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Let's talk about what we have going on here. So much when it comes to, we'll begin with immigration. You have those ICE raids, and so many questions about sovereignty and federalism and what the states should be able to do and what the president should be able to do. Was this a great riddle when you look at the National Guard, according to the 10th Amendment, right, is supposed to be at the state's behest. But then the president says, I got to protect my officers. There's a conflict there. That's hard to decipher.
This is the latest example of how the constitutional language from back in the 1700s is still debatable, still has to be interpreted, still has to be applied to modern situations, right? So federalism is a topic that we would cover in Intro to American Politics in my class at OU. And it's not the student's favorite, but because it's kind of historical and it's kind of boring, right? But it's so relevant, so important. Those questions that the framers wrestled with about governmental power, state power versus federal power, are always relevant, and this is just the latest example.
I find that interesting because this is a great example of when a professor can go back to the students and say, if you thought the Federalist Papers were obsolete, let me tell you what's going on in California right now.
Right.
But this is about sovereignty, right? Should a state have control? Should the nation's highest leader have control over a situation that's happening in a city in America? When you look at this particular one, I know without giving your specific opinion about it, the strife between the two, is there a clear resolution here? I know there's nuance, but when you look at it, what do you see here?
There's tension everywhere between state power and federal power. We have 3 areas of the Constitution that lay that out. The enumerated powers, Article 1, Section 8. The last one of those is called the Necessary and Proper Clause, which leads us to the implied powers, that the Congress and the federal government have power that aren't explicitly written down. And then there's the 10th Amendment that you mentioned. Those lay out the foundation for what is federal versus state. However, then you throw the president as commander-in-chief of the armed forces into this equation, and you get a recipe for uncertainty, right? So again, this is back to the foundational aspects of our government where, okay, when there's conflict, when there's tension, when we don't know the answer clearly, we have to turn to the courts, which of course is where this now lies.
We have 2 Republicans, so interesting. We always say Democrats and Republicans. There's actually in the Republican Party and within those who actually espouse some Republican beliefs, who used to think like a Republican, who now see the MAGA movement and say, what are we doing here? The immigration question is one that so many people are split on. We have 2 political commentators on with us here on The Pulse who have something to say about the immigration issue here in America right now. Take a listen.
People that have came here in most circumstances are criminals, are people, well, we know they're criminals because they're here illegally, but we have to support our president. We're a nation of law and law enforcement. And when we stop, when we pick and choose what laws we're going to enforce, there's going to be a problem. We just can't do that. We have to live, this country has to be, it was formed on law and order.
On immigration, even so that's his number one issue where he's best in the polls. Because his foreign policy numbers and his tariff numbers are in the toilet. Americans are overwhelmingly against his tariff policy. They're against his $5 million gold card policy. The only thing he pulls well in is immigration. And even that, the American people are saying, we favor the secure border, a majority. We favor deportations of a significant number of people that have come in the last 4 years. But we don't agree with the way that it's being carried out.
If you agree or disagree with that, let us know your thoughts. We always love to hear from you. We'll give you our email address at the end of the show. We have several viewers who have questions for Dave Dulio, political science professor here at Oakland University. And we begin with Monica. Thanks for your question here on The Pulse, Monica. We appreciate it. You're saying, hey, Roop, I'm curious why all of a sudden the DNC is running out of funds. Are people shying away from the Democratic Party and not donating? Do you think the DNC's reserves have suffered after USAID was hit by DOGE? Or is this just a result of internal conflict within the party? Dave, that's a loaded question. Where do you go with that?
Yeah, I think Monica hits on the answer here in her last point. I think this is tied to what some have called sort of a rudderless Democratic Party at the moment, right? I saw a former Obama administration official today call the party leaderless and messageless, which is no good when you're trying to get control of government back in the midterms coming up. But this is nothing new for the party that doesn't hold the presidency. Traditionally, the party that doesn't hold the presidency, there's competition for that. The leader of the party, right? Many Democrats could lay claim to being that head of the party, but nobody's really wrestled control of it and said, follow my lead.
But it's been 7 months since they lost an election and essentially, because of perhaps a campaign that didn't work, acquiesced the power to the Republicans. And here they are 7 months later, still seemingly without a real message or a real leader.
Well, and that's true, and that's a problem, right, for Democrats. They're going to have to get their act together here fairly soon. The 2026 cycle is not only right around the corner. Here in Michigan, we are already seemingly in the middle of it with all of the candidates that have announced, et cetera. So, you know, they have time. They have time, and I don't think the Democratic Party is going to be suffering for funds when it really matters in 2026.
Well, there's a lot of people who are watching on the other side of that camera who are Republicans and many more who are Democrats who will make sure of that because they,
no doubt,
they want their ideas to work here. Patty Hoover, thanks for your question here on The Pulse. We appreciate it. You're saying, can state police in Michigan refuse to help ICE? And is there a penalty for not helping?
Great question. And here's, I think, another element where we don't know the answer to this, really. We've seen some jurisdictions across the country try to resist helping ICE and not only try to, but have loudly stated, right? Some certain cities and jurisdictions in California, other Democratic states have said, no, we're not going to assist in any way. The penalty has been floated to withhold funding. Can't do that either, right? If money has been appropriated, it has to be spent. And there was a court decision just on that in this last week, that the president can't withhold road funding from states that don't cooperate with his policies.
But wouldn't that just be an opportunity for the president to do what he's already done in L.A. if he sees in any given place that the law enforcement's not helping ICE? He can then say, look, I need to protect my agents and send in the National Guard?
He could try, right?
Yeah.
And I think that protective power that is inherent in Article 2 of the Constitution is really I think protective is the important word there, right? Are they facing the same kind of dangers that they seemed to be in LA?
We have one last question from Sonia. We thank you for your question here on The Pulse, Sonia. What are the steps that really need to be taken to do away with Citizens United? Without abolishing the windfall of money pumped into the election cycles, do they feel either party will ever return back to serving their constituents and not billionaires and high-dollar donors? In the weeds with that one a little bit, but it's interesting.
It's in the weeds, but it's all important. It's also an easy one. Two paths. Number one, another court case that would give the Supreme Court an opportunity to overturn that decision and go in a different direction. Unlikely to happen. Second is a constitutional amendment that would really deal with another really important court case that doesn't get talked about enough these days. Buckley versus Vallejo from 1976 is really the court decision that started us down this path that eventually led to Citizens United. Another one that's tied in with the super PAC issue is Speech Now versus FEC. Buckley versus Vallejo started the money equals speech doctrine that the court has held to since then, that says if the government can't limit how much money you spend as an individual because that tramples on your First Amendment rights.
We're out of time, but you're spending as much time in the classroom as you are in the newsroom right now because this news cycle never quits. So we thank you for helping put things in perspective for us. Dave Dulio for us here on The Pulse. That is The Pulse for tonight. Remember to email us your political questions you want answered or fact check you want to see. ThePulse@fox.com, or you can use that QR code as well. I'm Rup Raj. As always, it was good to be with you.